You know, when you signed up for this conference, I bet no one thought I'm going to sign up to listen to a lawyer at about 4:20 or 4:10 in the afternoon. But I am here, and so are you. So I do have some slides up here, and I don't know if you have them in your materials. Maybe you can follow along with me as I walk you through. As Bruce mentioned, I'm a member of the board, and I practice at a law firm called Brownlee LLP. Can everyone hear me in the back, by the way? Yes? Okay, terrific. I practice with Brownlee LLP in Edmonton. And I have been practicing in construction law for my entire career since I graduated in 1989. So I've sort of seen a number of recessions, maybe 3 or 4, and the recovery. And the thing is, I've also seen a lot of innovation and a lot of changes in the industry. And the speaker just before me touched on 2 that I think are at the forefront, at least from the legal perspective. And some of you in the room who are familiar with BIM, it might not be so novel or so cutting edge, but it certainly is for lawyers. And are there any lawyers here in the room? Just one. I love this crowd. This is fantastic. But the prior speaker mentioned that BIM is often used in the same sentence and certainly on the same projects, or many of the same projects, as IPD. And integrated project delivery and BIM are the next wave. And maybe they're going to usher in some good times, or maybe they'll be coming in at a downturn in the economy or in the industry. I don't know. But certainly it presents a challenge to you as the users of this exciting technology, and certainly presents a challenge for us who are either sometimes ahead of the curve, but more often than not trying to catch up to where the industry is. So what I want to focus on today is just a little bit about some of the impact that this technology has on contracts, and talk about some of the contractual issues. And I'm often asked about that. And I want to discuss some contract wording. And then towards the end, I'm going to close off with some risk management strategies and be open to any comments or questions from you. We started a little bit late, but I promise I'm going to finish on time and certainly on budget. So and of course, when you hear lawyers talk, they always give you the legal disclaimer. And the legal disclaimer has to be that this is a great friendly chat amongst friends. This is not legal advice being provided to you by a lawyer that you can rely on. But I'd be more than happy to give you legal advice for our small, modest cash retainer. Okay. See, there you go. Lawyer at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, not so bad. Okay, so the good news. No judicial consideration of BIM language yet in Canada. I've looked high and low to see who is the lucky one amongst you or your industry to be that test case involving BIM. And we haven't found it yet. But I think that result is probably common sense. And I think it's probably reflective of what you heard some of the other speakers, and certainly the one before me, mention. BIM is a reflection of a collaborative approach. IPD is a reflection of a collaborative approach. Design build is a reflection of a collaborative approach. And so when you marry the contract that drives collaborative behavior with the technology that enforces collaborative behavior, I think the outcome is going to be collaboration, an absence of claims, or at least a good faith effort to avoid claims or reduce them. And you often marry with that, and we're going to come to that in a few slides from now, you often marry that with contract language that either limits or removes liability for certain kinds of claims. Now, the absence of judicial consideration for BIM wording or BIM contracts is of concern, despite the good message that it's giving the industry and users of collaboration. It is of concern for people like me, because sometimes people like me and people like you start to think about, well, where does this collaboration start and where does it end? Where do my specific responsibilities start and where do they end? And is there a blurring of lines between traditional notions of design and traditional roles and responsibilities of design with traditional roles and responsibilities of construction? How does BIM change the standard of care, if at all? How does BIM affect the extent of liability, and how is contract wording dealing with that, and who's going to be the first test case? So through the past, we have been able to look to other jurisdictions to help us, to help you in exploring these kinds of questions and looking for these answers. And we've often looked to the American example of the American Institute of Architects. They've had a BIM contract, or the Consensus Group in the United States have also had a BIM contract. Just out of curiosity, how many people here have used the AIA form? Some? How about the Consensus form? Same one or same two? We now have something a little bit more homegrown. And the Institute for BIM in Canada, the IBC, has come up with their own version of a BIM contract, or what they call it is a BIM appendix called the IBC 100-2014 Contract Appendix. How many of you have seen or used that? Okay, maybe a few of you. It's certainly in circulation right now, and it's coming to a BIM store near you. However, what are those areas of concern that the contracts have tried to address? Well, the one I hear often is copyright. Who owns the data? Who owns the model? What happens when I contribute or add to a model? Do I lose my rights, my traditional rights as a designer? How are the roles and responsibilities of the contributors that may have been defined by traditional roles and responsibilities? How are those changed? And are there any risks or liabilities that go along with that? And are there any other sort of hidden mines or bombs out there waiting for me in this as we navigate this minefield of this new technology, or perhaps these new contractual relationships? So the IBC has come up with something. And the IBC document is designed to act as an appendix or joined onto or grafted onto contracts that you already know or you should already be familiar with. Some of those documents are the RAIC number 6, the ACEC number 31, and the CCDC 2, 2008. You've all heard of those documents. You've all used those. But the word of caution is that when you sign this appendix, this BIM, this IBC BIM document, this BIM contract, it incorporates by reference the prime contracts, those that are further up the food chain, like the RAIC, like the ACEC, or like the prime contract between the owner and the general contractor, the CCDC2 contract. And it makes specific reference to those contracts in the BIM appendix. So I'm going to ask you, how many of you in your daily lives, how many of you ask for a copy of the prime or the head contract, or the head consulting contract, or the head construction contract? Not many of you ask for it. Those of you who ask for it, how many of you actually get it? I often find that when I'm acting, for example, for subcontractors, and the prime contract is referred to or incorporated by reference into their subcontract, they never get a copy of it because the general contractor doesn't want to show that to them, doesn't want to show how much they're getting paid, doesn't want to show the terms and conditions, and yet it becomes a term of their subcontract. So just in the same fashion in the IBC version, the prime or the head contract, the prime consulting contract, the prime construction contract is incorporated by reference. Make sure you ask for it before you sign on. So and that's important because of conflict between the terms of the prime contract and the terms of your BIM appendix. And you've all come across, I'm certain, those clauses in the general contractor's prime construction contract that deal with priority or hierarchy of documents. Yes? Yes, you have, right? The BIM appendix takes priority over to the extent of any conflicts. But you've got to look at those other documents that are incorporated to make sure that they are married together and that they align properly. So getting back to and underscoring a point from the previous speaker, yes, lawyers have a role to play when BIM is on the table and when BIM is being discussed. So we've got to make sure that you're taken care of contractually as well. The signatories to the BIM contract are called project participants because they each contribute to or use the model that's being created in this collaborative process. And each project participant, in turn, has to make sure that the BIM contract is incorporated downstream for any subconsultants or subcontractors so that there's complete contract alignment. And I think the concept of contract alignment is going to drive the collaborative behavior, and it's likely going to be responsible for reducing claims. When everyone's on the same page and everyone understands their roles and responsibilities and the risks and liabilities, and the contract wording is consistent with that, I think that's why you're seeing that there are no claims, at least none yet. So, what does this IBC document say about ownership of the data and the model? Well, first of all, it says that participants in the project, they agree that they will use and share the model throughout the project. And that's set out right in paragraph 1.3 of the BIM appendix. And I'm going to bore you with all the specific paragraph references in case you want to look at it or go to it, but it is in there. It also says that copyright is addressed in section 2 or paragraph 2 of this agreement. And it doesn't change the copyright that is the traditional copyright. A copyright belongs to the author who creates or develops the element of the model or the model itself. And the model or the element is defined by the terms of the contract, and it's defined by the appendix or a portion of the contract that defines the levels of development. So no real change there. The section paragraph 2.1 and paragraph 2.3 also say that when you're transferring that information to another user in this collaborative process, you're not giving away your copyright. You retain that. So there's no diminishing of rights, even though this technology is new. Paragraph 2.2 says you can't use that model, the owner can't use that model, that information for a subsequent project. Again, protects the traditional approach. Paragraph 2.5 says that when the model element is transferred to another party, it goes with a non-exclusive license. You can use it, you can modify it, as long as that use is consistent with the overall goal of the project and consistent with the protocol, and I'm going to come to that in a few slides from now, consistent with the protocol or the scheme of how this project is going to be developed and who is going to be developing and contributing to the various scopes of this project. The owner gets to use the completed model for facility management and the as-builts and for future work or renovations, and that's conferred by paragraph 2.6 of the agreement. It also sets out, the agreement also sets out in the model element table the different levels of development which each of you have to contribute to. These are all terms I'm certain are familiar to you. Yes? Yes, you're shaking your heads? Of course. So it's all covered in the contract. Paragraph 4 sets out the specific details of the scope of the modeling and how the parties contribute to that. It sets out what parts of the project in paragraph 4.2, what parts of the project require BIM. And in paragraph 4.3, it talks about what are the authorized uses for the model within the context of the project. And paragraph 4.4 sets out how as-built drawings are to be used. So as you can see, it provides a complete start-to-finish process for this technology. So one of the other risks we had talked about is what happens to the traditional roles of designer and contractor, and does BIM represent a change to those traditional roles? And the authors or the creators of this contract document were very careful to make sure that they expressly set out that it doesn't change the roles and responsibilities as you traditionally have understood them. Architects and engineers design, paragraph 1.8, and contractors construct, paragraph 1.9. It couldn't be more clear than that. And nothing changes the standard of care under provincial legislation or case law in paragraph 1.10. So the advent of BIM shouldn't change your risk of designing or your risk of constructing. And again, that goes back to the comments I made in one of the first slides, and that's probably the reason why we don't see case law or disputes in this area. Paragraph 1.7, all the parties are supposed to use their best efforts, consistent with this collaborative approach, their best efforts to avoid claims. Now, where do you see that in sort of the traditional contracts? You really don't. So again, this is something new, but it feeds into this collaborative approach, and it feeds into the absence of data that we're seeing as far as litigation is concerned. So a few more sources of information. Section 5 or paragraph 5 sets out a protocol. And this protocol is a detailed description of how each one of you contribute to the creation of the model. First of all, you have to designate who the quarterback of that team is, who's going to be the model manager. And in this form of contract, the architect is designated as the model manager, the quarterback of the team. And the duties of that person are set out in paragraph 5.8. And in the way that the contract is drafted, there's just a blank box, and you get to fill that in. You get to specify how far you, as the quarterback of the team or the model manager, how far you have to go, and all your roles and responsibilities associated with that. Paragraph 5.2, and as part of the protocol, it sets out the names of the model element authors and the extent to which each of these contribute to the level of development and what they're responsible for at each level of development for each project milestone. Tells you what you need to do, how detailed you have to do it, and when you have to have it done. The levels of development are defined from 100 through to 500. I think you're familiar with those concepts. It's borrowed. The nomenclature of 100 to 500 is borrowed from the American versions of the contract. And roughly, level 100 deals with conceptual design, 200 is design development, 300 is construction documents, 400 level of development is shop drawings or shop fabrication drawings, and level 500 are as-builts. Again, I think it reflects the traditional understanding of these various levels of development even before BIM came along. And paragraph 5.3 indicates, it provides the table and all the all the specific subtasks that need to be completed by specific time. So as long as you do what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, you're going to be fine. Consistent with and complementary to your obligations, there are certain restrictions on what you can use this information or the model or the model element for. Paragraph 3.2 of the agreement, all parties and users need to sign into this appendix, this contract, and this protocol before they can start using the data or before they can start passing it on to somebody else. If you receive this data and you haven't signed this appendix, or you haven't signed on to the protocol, and you use or rely on that information, or you turn that over to somebody else, you're doing so at your own risk. Because it constitutes an unauthorized use, and the reliance is you're not going to be able to legally rely on that information. Paragraph 3.3 talks about the uses that are inconsistent with the protocol, with the details of what you're supposed to do, how you're supposed to do it, and when you're supposed to do it. If you use it for anything outside of those parameters, again, you're doing so at your own risk. In paragraph 3.4, once the protocol is signed and your responsibilities are described in the levels of development, then each party can rely, you're entitled then to rely on the accuracy of the information that's given to you and you take and receive and pass along to others. Again, I think that's consistent with the collaborative approach, right? Lastly, the contract addresses risks and liabilities. And they typically go hand in hand with indemnity or waiver clauses. That's not new, but it shows up here in this contract. So paragraph 3.6 indicates that if a party uses the model for purposes that are inconsistent with the contract or inconsistent with the level of development that that party is required to achieve, then that party has to indemnify others who rely on that unauthorized use, right? The party that constitutes or creates that unauthorized use, they have to indemnify other parties if they suffer damages. Pretty straightforward legal concept, right? Because the party who relies on that unauthorized use or engages in that unauthorized use is doing something contrary to the contract. Paragraph 3.7. This is also an important one. Owner clients have to know and understand that electronic data, the model that's being used here, or models being created, and the model elements that are being created, there are inherent risks with electronic information. And so in paragraph 3.7, there is no express warranty regarding the integrity of the electronic data or the software. And in concert with that, the contract tries to limit the damages that might flow from that. And the damages right now are limited to direct damages only, not consequential or indirect damages. So for example, if there's an unauthorized use of the data and it leads to possibly some sort of a building problem where there is a structural problem, a direct damage would be the cost of having to repair that element of the building that has the structural problem. There is that's the only kind of damage that you might be exposed to. The indirect or the consequential damages that are excluded would be the loss of profits that the owner suffers because the building doesn't come online on time. Now that's different than some of the other prime contracts where the owner does incorporate clauses that deal with loss of profit or consequential damages. So you have to be aware of that, and you have to make sure that your BIM appendix is consistent, and if there's a carve-out for those kinds of loss of profit damages, make sure that you review the other kinds of losses that are incorporated into the contract further up the food chain. And the last slide is the confidentiality. That is covered in the BIM contract. Again, the information that you receive in the design or construction process when you're creating or contributing to the model, you've got to follow the confidentiality requirements of the agreements further up the food chain. Again, another reason why you need to see those contracts. So, though I've talked to you a lot about contract language and specific paragraphs, what's really the takeaway here about BIM from a legal perspective? Don't get caught up in the hype. It's brand new technology, but there are contract models out there that would protect your position, protect traditional relationships, traditional roles and responsibilities, and could limit risks and liabilities. Don't use words like, because we've got BIM, we're going to give you the gold standard of design. We're going to give you the most excellent building or most excellent project ever. Those kinds of words change the traditional standard of care. And the standard of care for designers or contractors is not the standard of perfection, but the standard of reasonableness. Whatever a reasonable architect or engineer or contractor would do in this set of circumstances. That's the standard. That's what you're insured for. When you start adding words like excellent or top grade or highest grade, that's altering the standard of care, and you might put yourself offside with your own insurer. Some owners think that because of this collaborative approach, because of this great technology, we're going to eliminate every single clash that's ever possibly going to exist on this project. Well, I think you all know or should realize that that's probably impossible. Clashes do happen in the field. Change orders are likely. Budget for them. It's going to happen. As far as the data information, I talked about the fact that electronic data, there are inherent risks to its integrity. Make sure that in the protocol in paragraph 5 of the IBC document, the model manager has to set up safeguards. How is that data going to be handled? And what are the protocols around that? Who gets access to it and when? And there's probably some insurance products out there that are available for data or the model that's being created. That's something worth looking into with your risk managers. Lastly, any lawyer would tell you, let's look at the limitation of liability clauses. I talked about that a few moments ago in terms of the kinds of direct damages that you could be exposed for, the exclusion of indirect damages. So if we get back to those kinds of damages that you can be exposed for, somebody might tell you, well, why don't we try to limit or place a dollar value on those damages, even though you know you're going to be exposed to them. Maybe let's limit them to X amount of dollars, right? Not leaving them open-ended. So something worth considering. Again, all of these are considerations that drive seeking appropriate legal or insurance advice with the BIM contract. So I think I've got you in just about on time and for sure, or under time and for sure on budget. So I know that that's probably a lot to digest at the end of a long day. If you have any questions for me now, I'll try to look out to the crowd, and if not, I'll be wandering around in the back if you want to approach me and tell me about your terrible BIM legal problems that nobody else wants to hear about.
Well, quick question here. I don't know.
There's a question at the back.
A quick question. Put your best effort forward. That clause, I know that probably falls under proper standard of care, but how would that be litigated if there were potential claims that this party did not put their best effort forward?
Right. So everyone heard the question. I think Brent, thank you, Brent, asked, if you use the words best efforts, or you have your best effort in doing something. I mean, I haven't seen that in the context of BIM, but every word in a contract is looked at and scrutinized in the context of the parties to the contract. What is the best effort of someone like Paul Stocko compared to someone like Bruce McCallum? Or is the effort different, right? And that kind of clause is a minefield for you. You have to negotiate this minefield, trying to figure out, have you done exactly what you're capable of doing, giving your best effort? And your minefield is a gold mine for me and for people like me. That's good. Write that down. So what does best efforts mean? I really don't know what best effort means. Like, I can't give you a shopping list that it's been determined to be exactly this. But let's go back to what I said a few moments ago. Certainly, you have to behave, carry out your contractual responsibilities in a way that a reasonable contractor, a reasonable architect, a reasonable engineer would behave in a similar set of circumstances to the ones that you find yourself in. And lawyers will split that hair as finely as they possibly can. And we call in experts, expert architects, or architects who give expert opinions about what the standard would be for an architect in that set of circumstances, or a consultant or an engineer in that set of circumstances, or what the reasonable contractor would have or should have done. It's the age-old question. Thank you for asking it, but I'm sorry I can't give you a better answer than that.
That was a good answer.
It's a long answer to a short question. There's a question over here. Yes, sir.
Hello. I came over from the US, from Seattle, and I do implementation since 2000. And about 4 or 5 years ago, there was actually a case in the US. Everybody was eager and waiting for that first case in regards to BIM. And so the general contractor who installed a mechanical system sued the mechanical planner and the architect because he couldn't install it. But what was the outcome was, it was actually not a BIM problem, it was a sequence problem. So the mechanical installer didn't really think it through how to install it in the sequence, because everything was so tight, because it was possible to model it that tight. So that was a first attempt in the US, I know, where everybody said, "Oh yeah, this is the first case now in regards to BIM."
Yeah.
So,
well, thank you for that. Thank you for that comment. And but that kind of sequencing or that kind of site coordination, it probably happens all the time, right? And it just happened to be under the guise of or under the umbrella of a BIM contract, right? Is that fair? We should also be careful, though, in drawing too many conclusions, though, from cases outside of Canada. Different countries and different jurisdictions have different principles. However, a point well taken is that if we do eventually have that first test case, more likely than not, we're going to look to either the American experience, if there is any, or the British experience, if there is any, as far as those kinds of circumstances are, and in terms of interpreting the meaning behind the words in the BIM contract. So thank you for your comment.
Could you please state your name and company?
Sure.
All right. Well, I appreciate your. Oh, there's another one. I'm sorry. Yes.
There's
please.
so many. I'm going to make it very brief. Back to that gentleman's question, he is talking about the family of the objects that you're putting into like the BIM process. So I remember that you were saying that the owner of all of the contractors and subcontractors, in terms of architect, mechanical, and a structural person, is the owner of the model of them are the consulting companies. What is the capability of, in that case, that's the model creation, like all of the detail creation, families creation that you're putting into the model, who's the owner of those bits and pieces? The manufacturing company?
According to the express wording in the IBC, it's the person who creates the element that becomes part of the model, right? The owner gets the federated model, I guess, or the complete model, and the owner gets a right to use that model. But the copyright ownership doesn't disappear from those who create or contribute to that model, right? It doesn't go to the owner. The owner gets to use it, right? But the owner doesn't own it. But the owner can use it for things like facilities management. That's part of the as-built process. Does that help with your question?
I have a question.
Yes. I'm struggling with the white light. I'm feeling like I'm being interrogated here. I'm having a... All right, yes, please.
Okay, here comes the interrogation.
Okay.
You talked about the standard of reasonableness as a standard of care, and that makes sense. By extension, you were also referring to, projects are going to experience during construction anomalies that will have to be addressed during construction, and therefore budget accordingly to deal with those RFIs, change orders, and so on. So you mentioned that in relation to the general contractor or construction manager. What about for the consulting team? So you're working in a BIM environment. Everything's supposed to be perfect. Everything's supposed to be coordinated. And there is lack of coordination, even in a BIM environment. We're experiencing this in a number of projects where we believe, and this is coming from an architect, by the way, a licensed architect, working with my colleagues, that I personally am seeing the lack of coordination in some areas in 3 different projects in a fully integrated BIM. So how should we address, now I know what I've done to protect the university in this particular case, but when we're talking about the standard of reasonableness, how do we address, should we be putting a little bit of cash money aside too for those additional changes that are going to happen as a result of the consultants?
Yeah,
Just curious.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm sure all of you have heard it. I think it's a question of managing client expectations. For those of you who deal directly with clients, you know how to do that better than I do. When you talk to a client and you tell them, this project should cost you $100 million. Is it $100 million? Or, whoever says that it's going to be $100 million and not a penny more. I think a reasonable contractor, a reasonable designer, a reasonable cost estimate always builds in a contingency or a factor for various unknowns. I'm not involved in that sort of process, but when I see it, that's the first question I asked. Did they tell you it's going to be $100 million and not a penny more? Or what was that information that was given? So there are circumstances where that arise. Secondly, as a consultant, as an architect dealing with the owner directly, you have some degree of control, limited though, over who your constructor will be. You have some degree of control if you encourage your client to go through a pre-qualification process so that you pick from a pool of qualified contractors, not from the great unwashed. So hopefully the contractors who are available can do the job. But even within that pre-qualified pool, there are going to be some who are better than others. And I think it's just a question of letting your letting your owner clients know, you know what, that's going to be an issue. The sub-consultants that become part of your team, you might not always get that person that you want or that sub-consultant that you want part of your team. Again, client management and client expectations. This may not answer your question, but I don't think that the standard of care being reasonableness means 100% accuracy. It means whatever's reasonable in the circumstances. I've heard judges say in other decisions, in other contexts, that it's reasonable to expect that there will be changes on a construction project of between 10 to 20%. Rule of thumb, not a legal precedent. I hope that addresses your point.
One more question, Paul.
Yes.
Over here. The model element authorship. So, you'll have elements that are at a certain level of development earlier on, they get passed across the supply chain, they increase. So I always describe the temporal nature of a specific element in the model will increase its level of whatever, development, detail, information, etc. Do you think blockchain technology will help as that tracking between the various parties will bring a legal record, a binding record of what was when and that temporal state upon turnover?
Brent, don't ask me about blockchain technology.
Come on, man, you could answer
Don't
it.
ask me. I've got this machine in my garage that's sapping all my power. I have no idea what it's doing. It's making Bitcoin. No, you know what? Listen, I'll be the first to acknowledge I don't appreciate blockchain technology and its impact on what you do. So I'm sorry you picked the wrong fellow. I'm a little bit more of an old school kind of guy, and that really is above my pay grade. I'm really sorry. Is there anyone who wants to respond to Brent's comments? I mean, I'll give you the podium right here. I just don't know. I haven't. I can tell you. I know that term is out there. My clients call me all the time. What the heck does this mean? I said, I don't know. Look it up on Wikipedia. I honestly don't know. Sorry. That's the first time a lawyer will profess to not knowing anything. And I'll send you a bill for that too. Thank you so much for your kind attention, and I appreciate that.